The Beatles' Something, written by George Harrison, is the second most covered Beatles song right behind Yesterday, and is heralded as not only one of the best songs on Abbey Road, but possibly the greatest love song ever written. Breathtaking, physical, and honest, this song stands as definitive proof that George Harrison was one of the greatest songwriters in rock and roll. This is the story of Something. During the recording of the White Album in 1968, George Harrison lays the groundwork to one of his finest songs. He says, "I had written something on the piano during the recording of the White Album. There was a period during the album where we were all in different studios doing different things, trying to get it finished, and I used to take some time out. So I went into an empty studio and wrote something." As we know, tensions were high between the Beatles as they began to work separately more and more. Some do argue that this actually might have hurt the band's compositions. It's hard not to wonder, though, if this separation was useful in bringing George Harrison's songs to the forefront. Generally in the shadows of John and Paul, George had been blossoming into a serious songwriting talent, and his contribution of Something seemed to have sealed the deal. However, even though George has the sole writing credit on Something, it seems even that couldn't break the spell of many people incorrectly thinking it was a Lennon-McCartney song. George famously recalls meeting Michael Jackson at a BBC event, and when a reporter asked George about his song Something, MJ said, "Oh, you wrote that? I thought it was a Lennon-McCartney." Michael wasn't the only one who thought that. Paul McCartney even suggests that Frank Sinatra got it wrong too, even when he introduced the song before he covered it. Paul says, "In fact, I think Frank Sinatra used to introduce Something as his favorite Lennon-McCartney song. Thanks, Frank." That can't be the best thing in the world for an ego, but as we know, George was a rather determined musician. Many people, including his former wife Pattie Boyd, believed the song was written about her, but George actually disagreed with that, and it seems he had something else on his mind. The song was written in a general sense about love and not one individual. In a way, this reality makes the song even more universally lovely. No wonder so many great musicians such as James Brown, Elvis Presley, Smokey Robinson, Frank Sinatra, and more have performed it. George has this to say about all those covers. "It has probably got a range of 5 notes, which fits most singers' needs best. When I wrote it, in my mind I heard Ray Charles singing it, and he did do it some years later. At the time, I wasn't particularly thrilled that Frank Sinatra did Something. I'm more thrilled now than I was then. I wasn't really into Frank. He was the generation before me. I was more interested when Smokey Robinson did it and when James Brown did it. But I'm very pleased now, whoever's done it. I realize that's the sign of a good song, is when it has lots of cover versions." Good song is right. And even though it's possible Frank Sinatra misremembered who wrote it, Frank went on to say that Something is the greatest love song ever written. But what did John and Paul think of George's new masterpiece? Well, John Lennon has a short but pretty jaw-dropping quote about this. He says, "I think it's the best track on the album." Remember, that album has songs like Come Together, Oh Darling, and I Want You. Those are some pretty impressive songs to best in John Lennon's eyes. Paul actually goes a bit deeper with his reaction, mentioning the obvious power dynamic in the group. He says, "I thought it was George's greatest track, with Here Comes the Sun and While My Guitar Gently Weeps. They were possibly his best 3. Until then, he had only done 1 or 2 songs per album. I don't think he thought of himself very much as a songwriter, and John and I obviously would dominate. Again, not really meaning to, but we were Lennon and McCartney. So when an album comes up, Lennon and McCartney go and write some stuff. And maybe it wasn't easy for him to get into that wedge, but he finally came up with Something and a couple of other songs that were great, and I think everyone was very pleased for him. There was no jealousy." Geoff Emerick, the sound engineer for the Beatles, even says how proud George looked when he entered the studio with Something, as he knew it was brilliant, mentioning how John and Paul knew that George had risen to their level, and that he did. Even to the point when they were figuring out how to record the song and its instrumentation, George coolly manages how even Paul McCartney contributed bass to it. Emerick says, "Paul started playing a bass line that was a little elaborate, and George told him, 'No, I want it simple.' Paul complied. There wasn't any disagreement about it, but I did think that such a thing would never happen in years past. George telling Paul how to play his bass? Unthinkable, but this was George's baby, and everyone knew it was an instant classic. Puts a new spin on that famous Paul-George argument, doesn't it? George also had a leadership quality in him that I think we're all glad he was able to finally utilize, and something will always be in my top 10 list of my favorite Beatles songs. That's it for the show. Thank you all so very much for watching. Now, do you believe that Something is the best song on Abbey Road? Or do you believe, perhaps, that Something is the best love song ever written? Let me know in the comments. Now, I'm gonna leave you with a love song from my very first album called Let Me Witness You. I wrote it because my dad told me when you fall in love with somebody, you share a rare gift. That is to witness them for the entirety of their life. And I think that is at the heart of love. I hope you enjoy it as much as he did. It turned out to be his favorite song on the album. See you next time. If I should go blind, I wouldn't mind. I'd rather feel you and tell you that you still look nice. If you couldn't hear, I'd still sing songs and tap the beat on your palm, and you could tap along. Let me witness you all your life. Let me witness you as you rise. If I couldn't keep my memories, I know I'd still be pleased to meet you every day. If you're stolen away, the hell I'd raise, the risks I'd take, to be sure you're safe.